Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Saturday, October 1st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Rutgers game is today, the game against Michigan in 56 days. Just 8 weeks away. That doesn't seem possible. How is that possible? Tony Gerdeman, how is that possible? Tony's my guest this morning. Tony, I don't understand. How are we already more than a third of the way through the college football regular season?
Well, Tom, the Earth is in a circular path around the sun. And the tilt of the axis provides seasons, and the moon keeps us in lock in the perfect orbit to allow us to have football.
Is that because the moon's made of spare ribs? Thanks, I'll take my answer off the air. We are here to talk about this week of college football. Got some interesting stuff going on today. The Buckeyes, of course, playing Rutgers. That'll kick off at 3:30. But there's some other interesting games of note today that we'll be keeping an eye on throughout the day. Let's start at noon. This one, boy, Tony, this one jumped out to me. Number 7 Kentucky, which number 7 Kentucky is a phrase that kind of jumps out to you sort of naturally. But number 7 Kentucky hosting number 14 Ole Miss. The Wildcats are a 6.5-point home underdog. Tony, if you're almost a touchdown underdog at home to the number 14 team, is that not a little bit suggestive that perhaps you are not, in fact, the number 7 team in the country?
Well, I will say it's actually in Oxford, so that helps to explain some of that.
Well, then, okay, so now you're a 3.5-point underdog, removing the home field advantage. And I'm going to blame covers.com. The jerks at covers.com.
I hate the way they list their stuff. I think they list like the fate. Yeah, I agree. It can be confusing, Tom, but I am here for once to help unconfuse you. This is great. This is fantastic. Do not restart this show. No, the way Ole Miss runs the ball, I think, is going to be the difference in this one. But I'm kind of confused as to how Kentucky has actually been able to do this. They've not been entirely healthy, but they just keep working. They just keep going, and they've got a good defense. They've got Will Levis can do some things, but I don't know that they're going to be able to score enough and stop Ole Miss's running game. You look at, they've got Ole Miss as freshman running back Quinshon Judkins, who's a 3-star guy, like the number 46 running back in the 2022 class out of Alabama, averaging 170 yards rushing per game, teaming him up with Zach Evans, who was like the number 1 running back in the 2019-2018 class that has played at TCU and now has transferred to Ole Miss. He's a career 7-yard per carry guy. He's averaging like 91 yards a carry, or 91 yards a game. So like those two, along with Jackson Dart, who can run it as well and can throw it a little bit. I just think there's going to be too much offense for Ole Miss. I actually like, I'll lay those points and be okay with it because I've been wrong about Kentucky quite a few times this season. So just be wary.
The top of the SEC East feels like it's a little better than it has been in recent years, where you've got a little more depth. It's not just Georgia and the rest. I think Kentucky's not the number 7 team in the country this year, but they're a top 25 team, and you got Tennessee, you got Florida, and that's not a bad division all of a sudden. I do wonder, I am like officially a little bit intrigued by Alabama and Tennessee playing in a couple weeks. I know, I hear you, I understand. It is still Nick Saban. I understand Tennessee is not really, really tremendous, but it's like that's maybe the most interesting that game's been in 10 years, 12 years. So we'll get to that game when we get to that game. But first, Tony, we got to talk about our favorite thing in the world, the Iowa Hawkeyes offense hosting Michigan, a smooth 10.5-point underdog. That game opened at 9.5 for Michigan. Now it is 10.5. I think this is probably the best challenge that Michigan's offense is certainly going to have faced this year in terms of a capable defense. What are you expecting out of Michigan? Are they going to be able to put up the 11 points that it's going to take to cover a 10.5-point line against Iowa this weekend?
I think they could do that. I could see them shooting as high as 12 points, honestly. This one feels to me like kind of like the Rutgers game for Iowa last week, but in reverse, like 27-10 Michigan, where it's I don't know if it's ever truly in doubt, but there's always an arm's length thing here. And the 10-point lead against Iowa is nearly insurmountable. So there's some comfort where you don't necessarily have to stretch out the lead if you don't need to. I am interested to see how J.J. McCarthy does against a solid Iowa defense, how the offensive line looks. What does Blake Corum do against this Iowa front? And he's been able to make the most of defensive mistakes. Iowa doesn't make a ton of defensive mistakes. They've given up 2 touchdowns this season. So that's not many. I think Michigan will top that. It's just how many turnovers will Iowa give them, and maybe that's the story for both teams. Like what the turnover margin, I don't think will dictate it. But if you give Iowa +2, I think that's a 4-quarter game.
It does feel like, well, and I mean, we just saw Iowa score a couple defensive touchdowns against Rutgers, so you get an early score there, make things a little interesting. I feel like this is one where we have seen teams go into Kinnick, and good teams go into Kinnick and just kind of get a little frazzled, and that's it's a loud stadium, it's a good solid defense. If they force a turnover early, let's see, Michigan has not really faced adversity this year at any point, any serious level of adversity. So let's see what that looks like if they, if they have to deal with that on the road. It's not the craziest thing to think that Iowa maybe pulls this out, but, something, Kinnick Stadium, something, pink locker room, something is kind of part of the conversation of how does Iowa win this game. So when you get to, these sort of soft factors like pink visiting locker room or whatever, probably not. But this. I feel like this is a week when we're going to learn a lot about J.J. McCarthy, just in terms of his kind of growth and development and how he's doing in terms of, being able to handle some situations where he's getting pressured a little bit more than he has earlier this year. Next up in the Big Ten, Purdue +12. Playing against Minnesota. Minnesota kind of, I think, probably the biggest surprise in the Big Ten, and the competition they faced has not been incredible, but they turned Michigan State into a grease spot last week. So I don't think Michigan State is great, but if you can go on the road as they did and just completely flatten the team, even if it's a not great team, just completely flatten them, that kind of means something. And Minnesota, this one opened at 10. It's now Minnesota by 12. How good is Minnesota this year? Is this a Minnesota team that you and I will be watching in person in Indianapolis in early December?
It wouldn't shock me at all. And how good is Minnesota? I don't know. I think it's a little bit of, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be not the slowest person. And you just don't have to you just have to not be the slowest team in the Big Ten West to make it to the bear in the Big Ten championship game. I'm still working on the analogy, Tom.
Some of your best work. Well, some of your work.
Work. But it's not just Mohamed Ibrahim who's running the ball. They got Trey Potts in there, and those two guys are teaming up. And Tanner Morgan is playing really, really well right now at quarterback. He's an experienced guy, but we've seen him play well for stretches and then kind of come back down to earth. And I think maybe that happens when they ask him to do too much. And they really obviously know what they have in him because he's been around since Glenn Mason, I believe. So, they're not going to ask him too much, but, he's completing 77% of his passes right now. And that all seems to be working. And I just don't know that there's any defense that is going to really be able to handle the run and then the play action stuff that they're able to do. So 12 points, that's a lot, and Purdue can score. So, I don't like this one. I think Minnesota is obviously going to win, but I like it more like a 10.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am. It feels like a lot of points, but here, the next one is something that would have felt like a lot of points a couple weeks ago, and now you kind of go, yeah, all right, I can kind of see that. Alabama -17 playing Arkansas. Alabama feels like, I think the first couple weeks it was like, well, is this a flawed Alabama team that might not? And you're just sort of kind of going, oh, okay, no, this is just an Alabama team. They're starting to look more like an Alabama team. They were a little disjointed on offense the first couple weeks. There is nothing about the Arkansas defense that suggests that it will get Alabama even slightly disjointed this weekend. Arkansas had one of the dumber losses. They find new and creative ways to lose to Texas A&M every year, having a ball stripped out at the 1 yard line and run back in a relay race of a 99-yard fumble return, like the old Ed Reed Boston College handoff fumble return. Poor Arkansas. They feel like they should win that game every year. It feels like they're out to like a 10, 14 point lead every year against Texas A&M, and they always blow it. And they blew it again. And now the reward is they get to play Alabama. This seems like it's probably not going to go great.
Just looking back at Alabama last year, they played 5 games that were decided by one score, and that feels like a lot to me. And one of those games was a 42-35 win at home to Arkansas. But I just think right now, Alabama, they came in, there's concerns about the offensive line. Well, all they're doing right now is averaging 7.3 yards per carry. All the defensive line is doing is holding opponents to 1.8 yards per carry. And this is an Arkansas running game that is really good, and they can run the ball with their quarterback as well. But this is also an Arkansas defense that has the second worst pass efficiency in the SEC. They don't really do anything great as a team. Like if you go through all of the SEC team stats, you're not going to find Arkansas near the top on hardly anything. What they do is they run the ball 50 times a game, which is insane. They have 200 rushes in 4 games. I don't think they're going to be able to do that in this one when you have an Alabama defense that, shuts opponents down. What has to happen is, even if Alabama wins on first down, you almost have to have KJ Jefferson win every third down, the Arkansas quarterback, whether it's scrambling, completing an 8-yard pass. Like, he needs to be so good on third down to make this a game. And the reason I was looking at last year's games is because I was thinking, like, maybe this would be one of those games where Alabama just the close win that every championship team has. But they've already had that against Toledo, or against, Texas. Texas, Toledo.
The Toledo of the South.
The UTs kind of get to me. But, like, they've already had that close win, so that will help them. I think they're going to roll Arkansas. I think, if you can't beat Texas A&M, I've got some questions about you.
Yeah, that just feels like that's just not going to be a great matchup, and I don't think they're going to be able to stop Alabama. And I think, if you're giving up 7 points a drive like they might against this Alabama offense at this point, that's pretty hard to keep up with, especially against an Alabama defense. So here's one that I looked at the line and I thought, boy, I wouldn't have believed this one 3 weeks ago. Michigan State getting more than a touchdown. Michigan State getting 7.5 against Maryland. I mean, I guess I think Maryland's okay. I don't think Maryland's great, but for Maryland to be, more than a touchdown against Michigan State, that is Vegas saying this is clearly the 4th best team in the Big Ten East. And I think that tells me, boy, there's a big drop off after number 3 in the Big Ten East, and there might be another big drop off after number 4 in the Big Ten East.
Yeah, I'm looking to see right now how healthy Talia Tagovailoa is. He had to leave last week's game against Michigan and then wasn't able to finish it. It's a little too banged up. I would expect them to obviously try to get him to go in this one. And this is a game that maybe before the season was a toss up. Now this is a game you have to win. This is one of those where it's there for you. It's on a platter. And I see nothing from Michigan State. They can't run the ball. They just were plowed through by Minnesota. I saw some powerful running game from Maryland at times against Michigan last weekend. So I would think they would be able to continue that against the Spartans. And then you get that, as I said, you get the play action going. This is an opportunity for those receivers at Maryland to kind of shake off what happened to them last week. So I think this feels, I'll lay those points, and that 58.5 point over under feels high to me because I'm not sure how much Michigan State will score. But again, I like Peyton Thorne. I like Jaden Reed. I like what they have at receiver. So maybe this is a shootout, but I still like Maryland by 8 or more than 8.
All right, and finally the nightcap. This is the game day game. North Carolina State getting 7, playing at Clemson. This is the first college game day visit to Clemson since something like 2016, which is crazy. I believe that was the Clemson Notre Dame Hurricane game, which they almost had another Hurricane game. The Hurricane's going to be through South Carolina, it looks like, on Friday, so you're going to narrowly avoid another Hurricane game. I think NC State played a Hurricane game against Notre Dame at one point too, right around that same time. I feel like Notre Dame had a couple monsoon games back-to-back years, 2015 and 16 maybe. So yeah, this will be another one where weather probably not as much of a factor as it could have been. I mean, I'm not sold on NC State. I'm not really sold on Clemson here, but this feels like this is going to be potentially the decisive game for which of these teams are we talking about when we're talking about college football playoff in a month or two.
Yeah, and you look at that over under 43.5, tells you how they feel about the offenses and the defenses, maybe more about the Clemson defense and Clemson offense than anything. But, NC State, people came into this year pointing at quarterback Devin Leary, like, look, he can lead NC State against anybody in the ACC. He has not played well to this point against anybody that matters. And when you look at the numbers, DJ Uiagalelei is actually the better quarterback. Like, he's playing better than Devin Leary right now. So it's been a while since Clemson has had the better quarterback in a big game, and I think they do in this one. And North Carolina State can't run the ball this year. They're probably going to be even worse against the run against Clemson. And so now they become one-dimensional, and this has to be Devin Leary's best game. And he has to be on point, and his receivers have to get open. And again, this is another one where third downs are going to be huge. And then, the Clemson offense can't rest on, oh, look how good we were in the past couple of weeks. They need to continue to prove it, and we'll see how good that NC State defense is. They have one of the best defenses in the ACC. So, I see it. I've got it as Clemson minus 6.5. So I will go with, I'll lay those points and hope for a touchdown win.
Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting one because it just feels like both of these teams are kind of deeply flawed in kind of different ways. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure they want to make the college football playoff, but I'm not sure they're going to like what happens to them if they make the college football playoff. So, but this is going to be what decides the ACC Atlantic Division. There we go. I did it. I think I did. I am famously completely unable to tell you who's in which division. This is the one that has Florida State in it, though, because the Coastal's the one that has all the mediocre teams. So there you go. So Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina State all in the Atlantic Division. You heard it here first, unless I'm wrong, in which case I really am breaking some news. But yes, I'm pretty sure that's the Atlantic Division. It doesn't matter. It'll be a fun, entertaining game. Should be a pretty close game, and hopefully we'll be home in time to watch a little bit of that at the end of a busy workday at Ohio Stadium. We will be at the Horseshoe around lunchtime or so to start getting set up for all of our pregame coverage. You'll be able to find that at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle, and then of course we'll do our live postgame show as soon as the clock hits 0. We'll have our usual team of analysts sharing their thoughts as soon as the clock hits 0. We'll have some postgame interviews. We'll be live with Greg Schiano, live with Ryan Day, all that kind of stuff. We'll have all those interviews. And then after that, we'll have our usual post-game instant reaction show, Tony and I, breaking down everything we saw, everything we heard, everything we learned with Ohio State and Rutgers. That's all at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit that bell so you get notified when we start going live with those, because those are always fun shows. And the more of you guys were there, the more good questions you're asking, the better those shows are. So looking forward to seeing you there. And that'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. Talk to you a little later on.